The restaurant was quiet in that familiar, comforting way, the kind of place where the lights were soft, the tablecloths were white, and conversations stayed gentle. It was the sort of place people remembered from years ago, anniversaries, small celebrations, or simply a peaceful evening after a long week. At a corner table near the window sat a young boy named Daniel. He couldn't have been more than 10, dressed neatly in a navy blazer that looked just a little too stiff on his small shoulders. His brown hair was carefully combed, but a few strands had already fallen loose, as if even they were tired of holding everything together. Across from him sat his father, Richard. Richard was a man who carried success the way some men carry a heavy coat, always present, always noticeable. His suit was perfectly tailored. His watch caught the light every time he moved his hand. People in the restaurant had already glanced his way once or twice, quietly recognizing him. But at that moment, none of that seemed to matter. Because Daniel was crying. Not loudly. Not in a way that would draw attention. Just quiet tears, slipping down his cheeks, one at a time. The kind of crying that comes from holding things in for too long. Richard shifted in his chair. He wasn't an unkind man. He loved his son, deeply. But he was a man who had built his life on control, on solutions, on fixing problems quickly and moving forward. And this wasn't something he knew how to fix. Daniel, he said softly, trying to keep his voice steady. We talked about this. You're okay. But Daniel didn't answer. He just stared down at the table, at the neatly folded napkin, at the silverware lined up perfectly, as if everything around him was too orderly for what he felt inside. A few steps away, a waitress had been watching. Her name was Claire. She moved with quiet confidence, the kind that comes from years of doing a job with care. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and there was a warmth in her eyes that people often noticed, though they might not have been able to explain why. Claire had seen many dinners in that restaurant. Celebrations, arguments, first dates, last goodbyes. And she had learned something over the years. Sometimes, what people needed wasn't more words. It was the right words. At the right time. She approached the table slowly, not wanting to intrude. Is everything all right here? She asked gently. Richard looked up, offering a polite but distracted smile. Yes, thank you. We're fine. Claire nodded, but her eyes drifted, just for a moment, to Daniel. She saw the trembling lip, the way his hands were clenched under the table, the way he was trying so hard to be quiet. And something in her softened. Would it be okay, she said carefully, if I spoke with him for just a second? Richard hesitated. Not out of suspicion, but out of unfamiliarity. He wasn't used to letting others step into moments like this. But then he looked at his son again. And something in him loosened. All right, he said quietly. Claire knelt beside Daniel's chair, lowering herself to his level. For a moment, she didn't speak. She simply waited. It's a small thing, waiting. But it can mean everything. After a few seconds, she leaned in just slightly, close enough that her voice wouldn't carry beyond the table. And she whispered something. Daniel's shoulders tensed at first. Then, slowly, they eased. His breathing changed. The tightness in his face softened, just a little. He looked at her, really looked at her, as if trying to understand how a stranger could know something so personal. Claire gave him a small, reassuring smile. The kind that says, "You're safe here." Then she stood, nodded politely to Richard, and walked away, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Richard blinked. He wasn't sure what he had just witnessed. But he knew one thing. Something had changed. Daniel, he said gently. Daniel wiped his eyes with his sleeve, something Richard would normally correct. But tonight, he didn't. What did she say? Richard asked. Daniel hesitated. Children sometimes hold on to words, the way adults hold on to memories. Carefully. Because they matter. Finally, he spoke. She said. Daniel's voice was soft, but steady now. She said it's okay to feel small sometimes, even when everyone expects you to be big. Richard leaned back slightly. Those words, simple as they were, landed somewhere deep. Daniel continued. She said her son used to cry like that, and that it didn't mean he was weak. It just meant he was trying really hard to be strong. The room seemed quieter now. Not because anything had changed around them, but because something had changed within them. Richard looked at his son, really looked at him. Not as an extension of himself. Not as someone who needed to be prepared, or guided, or shaped. But as a child. A boy who was still learning how to carry the world. "I'm sorry," Richard said, after a long pause. Daniel looked up, surprised. I've been asking you to be older than you are," Richard continued. "And that's not fair." There was no grand gesture. No dramatic moment. Just honesty. Simple, quiet honesty. And sometimes, that's enough. Daniel nodded slowly. The tears were gone now. Not because everything was fixed, but because he didn't feel alone in it anymore. Claire returned a few minutes later, placing their meals gently on the table. She didn't ask questions. She didn't linger. But as she turned to leave, Daniel spoke. "Thank you," he said. Claire paused, looking back at him. "You're welcome," she replied softly. And for a moment, their eyes met again. A shared understanding. A small bridge between two lives that would likely never cross again. And yet, had touched. The rest of the dinner passed quietly. Not awkwardly. Not heavily. Just, peacefully. Richard didn't check his phone. He didn't rush the meal. He asked Daniel about school, about his favorite books, about things that didn't need to lead anywhere. And Daniel answered. Not perfectly. Not confidently. But honestly. Years later. Daniel would remember that night. Not for the restaurant. Not for the food. Not even for the tears. He would remember the feeling. The moment someone saw him, without expectations. The moment his father chose to listen, instead of fix. And the quiet kindness of a woman who understood that sometimes, the smallest words carry the greatest weight. Because life has a way of teaching us, slowly, gently, over time. That strength doesn't always look like standing tall. Sometimes, it looks like sitting quietly, and letting someone remind you that you don't have to carry everything alone.